with the Star City Games tournaments. I mean, I remember seeing you in Indiana. I remember seeing other places.
Yep.
You know, these are a lot more people than that, right? You're getting more people than you were getting back then.
Yeah, it's continued to grow. And you know, actually, one of the people we've got who definitely has made a commitment to the Open Series is on the left of your screen right now, AJ Sacher. He has definitely has made a commitment to come out for a bunch of the events. We're trying to get some lists right now for AJ and David. So.
Now, David Shiels is the recent Grand Prix champion. He's playing a slight variation on the Grand Prix championship list that he did with Cawblade. It's maybe, if I remember correctly, 1 or 2 cards different than his Grand Prix list. And we have those lists available, of course, on the Star City Games deck database.
Yep. So it looks like AJ looked at his first 7 and it was not good enough to run against the Grand Prix champion. So it's really one of the things that I found very interesting about Grand Prix Dallas was that you definitely saw the influence of the Open Series. You had a lot of players. Alex Bertoncini made his first Grand Prix top 8, but you also saw Oren Beasley, who has done a lot in the Open Series, and a couple of other players who are familiar names from week to week. And also you could definitely see the influence of the Open Series on the standard metagame. It definitely has become a very defined metagame and major tournaments every weekend. And I'm going to shamelessly plug here the Too Much Information articles that we get out about each of the events definitely provide the type of background knowledge that allow people to really dig into a format and find that right depth. So we now have the list in front of us. It looks like AJ is playing a blue-white Cawblade, and David, once again, piloting blue-white Cawblade as he was at Grand Prix Dallas. We're going to take a look, see what differences Dave has, and what he has decided to switch around, see whether or not he's changed a couple of his choices. Tough to argue with winning a Grand Prix.
Yeah, I know that I believe in Dallas that he had tumble magnets, and I believe that he's taken them out. And AJ is still running with tumble magnets. On the screen, you can see David starting off. Turn 1, Glacial Fortress. AJ Sacher responding with the Scalding Tarns. Turn 2, Critical Turn. Down comes Stoneforge Mystic.
AJ sending away to pick up an island. See, does AJ does have Spell Pierce, but that's not going to do him any good against the Mystic. So it looks like he's just sending away so that he's ready to go.
Now David grabs a Mortar Pod.
Well, AJ lays a Plains, decides what to do before dropping his own Mortar Pod. Now that's a card that wasn't on lists a month ago.
Yeah, Mortar Pod is a surprisingly effective card for a lot of reasons. It's very effective against opposing rug decks, being able to get rid of a Lotus Cobra when you don't want it to be around, as well as turning a lot of your Squadron Hawks into, little Mog Fanatics.
It makes equipping any of the swords very hard because it's just tough to do that when you have instant speed damage on the other side of the board. It makes some of your math pretty hard. As David uses the Stoneforge Mystic to bring down a Sword of Feast and Famine, and on his turn goes ahead, equips up the Stoneforge Mystic.
AJ here has 2 Condemns in his deck, so this Sword of Feast and Famine is not necessarily going to straight up connect.
Players, in standard box number 2, your event is ready to start.
Another Stoneforge Mystic.
And this one
Finds
nothing. He's already got everything he can get. He already has the sword in hand or in play, and the mortar pot in hand.
Now it's interesting to see David
discarding an island on AJ's side.
Yeah. David running only 2 pieces of equipment.
And there comes the
Here
mortar
is
pot.
The mortar pot. Now, do you feel that you need more than one sword in a Cobblade deck?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, obviously we're seeing David Shiels here, who won a Grand Prix with only one. AJ looking for some way to kind of come back in this game. It looks like he has got some land to choose between as an island and
Stoneforge, Day of Judgment. I believe that's Day. Yep. Day of Judgment.
Starts out slow, starting with a Stoneforge Mystic, checking to see if that works. That's fine, says David.
And now AJ is going to go find his sword, and we're at a point where Stoneforge Mystic actually becomes Squire. So with a lot of the Cobblade decks really shorting down on equipment, they have so much search to go get it, you don't need to run it for that reason. But is this a situation where some pinpoint artifact destruction might be absolutely devastating in this match?
Well, I mean, I think that that's one of the reasons you often see Divine Offering in the sideboard.
Yeah, there's 2 in each board here. Now they also have the additional sword, as well as Sylvok Life Staff for David, and
Sun Titan on both sides.
AJ.
So they're actually expecting that war to happen. They're expecting the Divine Offering war to happen. David mulling over his options here. He's got his Jace hood on. Squadron Hawk. And AJ scoops it up.
Decides it's about time to see whether or not he can get a 7-card hand that's a lot better than those 6.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, if that Squadron Hawk resolves, essentially what ends up happening is that the sheer power of those cards, making the Sword of Feast and Famine definitely hit, making an endless little stream of creatures that can, you know, pick up that sword and carry it. There's not much that AJ can do without, at that point, like, immediately coming back with the Hawk, but he's still behind. There's a mortar pot in play, and it's ready to stop him from his first sword use.
Even just taking a Hawk off the top, he's too far behind at that point. He's ready to start playing some sideboarding matchups, which I'm sure he's done a lot of testing at.
Yeah. I mean, he did have a Day of Judgment in his hand, but again, the Hawks are pretty good against Day of Judgment.
So let's see, what do we think is coming in? Do we have a close...
The expectation I predict here, the Divine Offering, Jace Bellerin, and Sun Titans for AJ Sacher, and the second Sword of Feast and Famine. And then on the other side, I would be expecting the second Sun Titan, because Dave Shiels does play one Sun Titan main, Divine Offering, Sword of Feast and Famine, Jace Bellerin. So, pretty similar set of cards.
So there's really only 2 cards different for Dave Shiels and AJ Sacher out of the board. AJ opts for Oust, whereas Dave has a Condemn, and then Dave also has a Deprive and an additional Journey to Nowhere, whereas AJ has an additional Sun Titan and the additional Oust. So pretty close on the on the choices in the sideboard, pretty close on the choices in the main. Dave was just able to come out and get ahead in that first game, and AJ couldn't get back into it. It'll be interesting to see how their strategies change now that they've gone ahead and sideboarded. I think both of them probably have a pretty good idea of what they're going to see. So as we shuffle up, just a reminder, we're coming to you here from StarCityGames.com Open Weekend up here in Boston. If you're around the area, come on out tomorrow. We've got draft opens and the Legacy Open going to be starting up, still running. We know it's Easter. We'll find some Easter eggs, hide them all around.
AJ looking up to the sky, or perhaps someone standing up.
Now AJ is likely asking David what he sided in. He quite often is spends his time in between games bantering with his opponent, and it's all fun and games. But AJ he's looking for information there. He wants to figure out if there's any little piece of tech that he can figure, so that he has more information to go on in Game 2.
He'll win matches if you just let him make them happen. Even his plays are sometimes
So we're ready to go. I assume that AJ will be on the play in game number 2. So let's see how his 7 turn out this time.
Said keep. Really emphatic keep.
Looking over his shoulder, it looks like we've got... Oh, and we start off with...
Land v land.
Celestial Colonnade from AJ Sacher, and then a Seachrome Coast preordains for David Shiels.
Stoneforge Mystic.
Yep. Won't be able to just pick up the deck after New Phyrexia comes out. Gonna have to wait to see whether or not the other person pays 2 life and makes you pay that 1 extra. And once again, Mortarpod is what the Pobblade players are finding first in this mirror. David lays a Plains before playing a Squadron Hawk.
He's got a pretty full hand. He's only going to get 1 or 2. I think he's got 1 here, so he doesn't have to discard. Yep, 1. Jace the Bee. Jace Bellerin.
Yep. Gets AJ an extra card. And that Stoneforge Mystic got in for 1, I believe. So David draws up to 8, plays a Glacial Fortress. Plays his...
Attacks Jace Bellerin.
And that Jace the Mind Sculptor in David's hand is not going to do a whole lot for him unless AJ's willing to burn his Jace Bellerin and
Pumps it up. Both players get to draw.
Yep. AJ's willing to give David a hand extra card to keep Jace on the field.
Predicts a Mortarpod here.
So it comes down.
Full grip of cards, 7 cards there.
Passes back over. So that's a Gideon that we see. Trying to see what else we've got. Looks like a Divine Offering. He's got the sword in his hand. So that's another reason why he fetched the Mortipod. David did that last time, went and got the Mortipod simply because he didn't have a sword to go get because it was already in his hand.
Yep.
So those two Hawks coming in at Jace. AJ's got to decide if he wants to take one of them out with the Mortipod, keep Jace at a point where he can draw for him, or if he just sends it down to one and
I think he's okay dropping
he'll
it
draw
down to
up again. David's still looking at 8 cards, so he's got to do something or drop it down. Here comes the 3rd Squadron Hawk. And it looks like David's going to go and search out the last one.
Just feels that way. Yeah.
Sword comes down at the end of the turn.
Did he?
Okay, 2 mana for AJ here. Equipping. Could potentially pop. There it is. Pops the Hawk. In comes the...
Celestial Colonnade.
Yep. And this is going to get condemned, which I believe will be countered, which the question is whether there's a Spell Pierce to protect that condemn. Is there a Spell Pierce? This could be the whole... There's the Spell Pierce. That was a devastating turn. David Shiels just did a lot of work there.
Needed it, though. That was about to be Gideon coming down after equipping up and getting in. Jace gets both of the players another card. It's very nice that way. And AJ passes over, tapped out. So let's see what David can do here. Now he's got the Stoneforge Mystic, so he could go get the sword, or is he already holding it? Looks like he's already holding it.
Tapped out.
Yep, he's holding the sword, drops the sword, equips the sword, hits with the sword, untaps. That's just going to be a beating right there. And that just turns around.
Boom. With this mana available,
That's
something.
That's what AJ was trying to do to David, but the Condemn and the Spell Pierce were able to protect him, and he was then able to take full advantage of AJ being tapped out.
Preordain.
Preordain finds 2
Lands.
cards that are probably going away.
I think that's a Celestial Colonnade
right
and
to the bottom.
something,
Let's
something.
draw blind. Draw blind.
Sun Titan.
It's pretty good draw blind. There's a lot of talk about Jace the Mind Sculptor being banned. I think that was overblown a bit.
I agree.
But the question that came up a couple times in that argument is, how about Preordain? There's just the same. There was the same amount of copies of Preordain as there were Jace, and as David goes and fetches his 2nd Sword of Feast and Famine as some protection against the expectation that AJ has some divine offerings to find.
AJ does have a full hand here.
And let's see.
First play, perhaps a Stoneforge Mystic. Maybe a Caw, Squadron Hawk.
Lots of choices at 2 for this deck. Squadron Hawk is going to go and find some friends. In this case, I think that he's just going to empty his deck out. There's no reason he's going to be able to hold on to all of them. David had to play them all and grabbing one more at a time. But AJ's depleted his hand enough at this point that he can just go and grab the set. So for all that's been happening, not a whole lot of life total changes.
Now the kind of movements that's AJ lays a 6th land, says go.
Now the question is going to be whether Dave goes for the Sun Titan or whether he holds back.
There's no way he's going for a Sun Titan against that mana there.
I think he's in a position where he's doing just fine right now, and so he doesn't need to be aggressive. Definitely doesn't need to run that Sun Titan into a mana leak or anything else.
Let's see where David goes with this. Now,
Dave surveys the board. He's got to like what he sees right now.
oh, I would be so happy to be in Dave's position, honestly.
An interesting choice by AJ to equip up with the Mortipod rather than with the Sword of Feast and Famine. Rather than try and straight up fight the other Squadron Hawk, he's willing to just block it and then kill the other one.
4 mana. 5 mana. Oh, no, 4. Activate the Mystic. Equip.
Now, you got to think that AJ's play was not thinking about the second sword, which he had seen. Because the Mortipod on the Squadron Hawk was definitely to block and then sacrifice to kill the other,
Divine Offering here.
which is going to let him
If it resolves.
basically do the same thing if he can get it to go
It does
through.
resolve, so he's going to get the block and then
Gain some life.
block and then kill the
Yep.
Squadron Hawk.
Now he does get to do that.
Yep.
All right, so he was one step ahead of us. Knew a little bit more than we did. Now remember, he's still got those 3 Hawks in his hand. That's going to let him go ahead, get them back down, get a sword on it, and fight against David's Hawks. David already has, I believe, 2 Hawks in the graveyard, one of them left in his hand, and the one that's on the table. And he's going to keep up.
Did he just put a land into play, like really high in the board? Is this like slightly off screen, or?
No, that's the Hawk that just died.
Okay,
He's got the
okay.
Tectonic Edge, which brought him to 6.
Okay, I just couldn't quite see whether that had been the case.
And so that looks like Gideon just joined AJ's hand.
Got 4 mana here.
So you'd think this is probably a Squadron Hawk and equipping it with sword.
He's got 4 mana. I think he might do something else. 5 mana, going for the Gideon. Perhaps Gideon with Spell Pierce backup.
Since the Divine Offering made it through, Glacial Fortress gives him many options to protect this here. And since that Divine Offering made it through, I think he's just calling David, saying, I don't think you have a way to stop this.
Yeah, that's probably very fair. The question is this Gideon a murderer, or is it a charming guy that's going to bring you right over to him? Yeah, come on over, guys.
Well, you got to think that it pretty much just shuts off the sword. Because when those swords are hitting planeswalkers, they're not doing much.
So here's the thing. Tapped out as he is, AJ can't stop a Gideon from David if David has one. So that would be an answer to that Gideon.
Yep. Now, it's interesting he followed it up with the Squadron Hawk. That may indicate that he doesn't have a Spell Pierce or a Monolith, or that he thinks that David's getting outside of that range. Now, David also, he's got the Sun Titan in his hand, and so he's going to be able to drop that down. He could bring back a sword. He could bring back another Squadron Hawk. He's got no more Hawks to go get, so depends on whether it's that's debatable whether that makes any sense. But bringing back the sword, I think, would be a pretty big.
He's looking at his yard. He's thinking about that Sun Titan in his hand.
Yep. What to go get?
If he goes for it, is it worth it?
The problem with this is you have an opportunity here to do something big, but if you take that opportunity, you're going to put yourself back in a situation where your opponent can do something big. There's Sun Titan bringing back Squadron Hawk. That leaves a Glacial Fortress up. Jace ticks down to give AJ an extra card. Gideon and Jace play pretty well together. You can keep ticking that Jace down nice and low, even if David has some ways to deal a little bit of damage, because it's all coming at Gideon. Three.
Tumble Magnet, perhaps?
Now,
I think that's a Tumble Magnet. We have the Spotter, perhaps check. I'm not sure if we can see if that's a Tumble Magnet or not. So.
Yep. That's a Tumble Magnet up there underneath the the AJ. And that's actually pretty big, because not only would the Sun Titan be a legit threat to actually knock Gideon out, but also all it needs to do is attack to do its thing. The swords need to hit a player, and that's a big difference. That's one of the reasons that Gideon is such a beast in this matchup. But Sun Titan attacking gets to just bring some more stuff back in, no matter whether it's attacking Planeswalker, player, doesn't matter, still doing its thing.
Casts another Squadron Hawk. Leaves himself with 2 mana open.
Now it's a Stoneforge Mystic in his hand, which we think should be able to go and get another sword, because we expect that he's brought it in. He now equips up Squadron Hawk.
Please attack Gideon.
You've got to think that Gideon's ticking up here, but he could also take out one of the Squadron Hawks.
Untapu.
If you wanted to be really aggressive there, he could have tapped down the Sun Titan and taken it out right then and there.
It's true.
Because you've got to think the Tumble Magnet is going to tap it down now anyways.
He can always delay that by a turn if his Gideon can survive. He does have 2 blockers.
If he lets that Sun Titan get in there, though,
but he's
that
got
other
the tumble.
sword is coming back.
But he's got the tumble, so he can do the tumble a turn later. You know, do it during the combat. There it is, tapping it.
And now that does mean that he can use it to shut off the swords in the future.
Now we got some blocks happening. It's going to clear up the board a little bit here, it looks like.
And AJ's happy to make those trades because he's still got Hawks in his hand. Or a Hawk in his hand. So Gideon actually nets 1 over that turn.
Yep.
And AJ nets a lot of board position.
This is an important moment here for Dave. His opponent's tapped out. He's got the opportunity to do something. It better be something good. If he's looking at that 2 mana as a means to equip that sword, that's not that hot. Squadron Hawk. Equip Squadron Hawk. Sego.
Figures out that a flying 3/3 is a little better than a 3/4 sitting there on the ground.
And now, as you mentioned before, the Gideon has the opportunity, if it wants to kill that Sun Titan. Just a slight delay.
Yep. And that also then leaves the Tumble Magnet up and effective for this turn. Definitely the more cautious play. AJ looks at his graveyard. The 3 Hawks sitting there. Knows there's no more Hawks to go get. 2 more mana. Let's see what's going on. Hawk's going to pick up the sword. AJ thinking about how he's going to handle this.
Tumble Magnet just off screen above the Stoneforge Mystic.
Yep.
Stoneforge Mystic getting the second Sword of Feast and Famine I'm willing to bet. There it is.
There you go. And Gideon is going to drop that Sun Titan. And Dave's looking at this board trying to think, what do I draw to get out of this here? So the big question in my mind is, how aggressive are you going to be with the Tumble Magnet? Because you've got those 2 counters, and those are pretty precious counters. This turn, David's creatures are free to attack wherever they want to. Last few turns they've been having to go after Gideon. But this turn, taking out the Sun Titan leaves...
No need to worry about it. I think, honestly, at that position, AJ was far enough ahead that he could just use the Tumble Magnet as an insurance policy and ride the board position that he had and not worry about the rest.
Yep.
I mean, really, the Jay Spellerin did so much work there, just staying alive and pushing ahead.
Yep. And now at this point, we are tied up 1-1. With AJ Sacher and David Shiels. Round 8 here at the Open Series in Boston. I'm Jared Silva. I'm here with Adrian Sullivan on SCG Live.
Hello, everybody.
And as we move to Game 3, definitely a different game once you've had that sideboard. Changes up the matchup a lot. Bringing in the Divine Offerings, bringing in additional Swords of Feast and Famine, and we didn't see any Sylvok Lifestaff.
That wouldn't probably come in here. Just
don't think that's...
The life gain isn't good enough, right?
The Sun Titan definitely played a role, even though it didn't get David there. And the... The question that I've got here is, how do you change up your sideboarding strategy now that we're flipping who goes first? You know, how many cards change in terms of power level, whether you're on the play or on the draw?
You know, I think that one of the things that you usually see is that a lot of people like to claim that going first matters a lot in this matchup, just because of the ability to get down that first 2-drop, one of the key 2-drops, typically the Stoneforge Mystic, but there's nothing to be considered a slouchy about Squadron Hawk. But I know, interestingly, I believe AJ, in one of his recent articles, I believe he said that in other matchups versus black-blue control, I believe, he actually likes to draw. And there was some debate about whether that's reasonable or not. In most matchups, being on the play and constructed is a huge deal, but this is one of those matchups. But I do find it interesting that, you know, there are matchups that AJ thinks maybe you should consider drawing.
Well, the card is definitely big when you come down to a control-on-control matchup. And if he feels that he can get out ahead and his cards can power out, regardless of whether he is on the play, then that extra card can be big as AJ throws back again, and that's not good for him.
So
David has already kept his 7. AJ looking for 6 that are going to do better than they did in game 1.
a little word from a little bird earlier. Shaheen Sarani, not playing any preordains, playing some Vencers. It sounds like he is probably going to be able to draw into top 8.
Shaheen is definitely a proponent of the classic blue-white control. No blades for him. He's happy to be sitting on the other side of the table and telling you whether or not your spells are going to resolve.
Exactly. And it looks like AJ surveying the new hand. Keeps it. We got a Seachrome Coast V Island. Turn 2 is the key moment. We see a Stoneforge
Looks like we're
Mystic.
going to see a Mystic from both of them. AJ not even waiting for David to go search. He's gonna play his Squadron Hawk here. And on the draw, but down a card due to the mulligan, he can get 2 of them.
I was telling someone earlier that it'd be kind of fun if David Shiels got some glowing contacts to match that cowlish hood that he has.
I'm not sure that Jace wears Abercrombie.
It's fair, it's fair. Speaking of the devil, draws a Jace. Big Jace, as it were.
Now, we haven't seen a Mind Sculptor come down. Balerion was actually very important in the last game. And almost, David couldn't find a time that it was worth throwing 4 mana away to just take it out. But
It's just too risky. If you spend that time and you do it, and it gets countered, being open is just devastating.
it's very hard. We saw big turns happening every time that someone tapped out. Gideon, Sun Titan.
We've got a second Squadron Hawk for AJ Sacher.
Followed by a Glacial Fortress. First Squadron Hawk gets in, and not many Cawblade matchups are won by Squadron Hawks swinging all on their lonesome.
Sword of Feast and Famine dropped into play by Stoneforge Mystic.
And that's going to be very tough for AJ to deal with.
It looks like there's 1 land in David Shields' hand. Maybe I'm misreading that. I think I see a Scalding Tarns in his hand.
Yeah, I see a Gideon.
It's either he might not have any lands.
Stoneforge, Jace.
Maybe there's no land there.
That would be interesting.
Oh, there's no land there. That's actually pretty rough for David Shields. AJ preordains.
AJ, on the other hand, is full of land. He's looking for stuff to do.
Spell Pierce has been found.
Interesting to see David not equip the sword and come in. Because if he represented he had another land to play, I think you almost have to block.
I mean, there's always the fear of a Condemn hitting you. And there's the 3rd Squadron Hawk. In comes Hawk.
And here's a
Mortar
Mortar
Pod
Pod
comes
coming
down.
into play. Okay, so he still had stuff to do. There's another sword, and that's not going to help him at all. Just means he can keep his mana leak mana up and still do something functional at the end of his turn. But he's starting to get a little too far behind here. You can tell he just wants to do something, and he's going to equip and send in.
Let's see if a Condemn does anything. Nope, just going to be a chump block. Say go. Representing possibility for a Condemn of his own or a Spell Pierce.
Hoping to keep AJ off of dropping a Gideon or something that takes control of this game.
Fifth land from AJ. Looks like a Nexus.
Yep, Inkmoth Nexus.
And there's a Jace, little Jace. And he's got the mana there to pay for a Spell Pierce.
Goes down. picks up. He's actually got Mana Leak up, which obviously would shut down anything David can do right now. Running short on lands is very bad in this type of matchup. But instead, AJ chooses to just drop the last Hawk. He's going to go with Hawk Beats, it looks like. David once again finds more gas, and unfortunately...
oh, look at this. I see a Glacial Fortress.
Oh, nope. He finds that land that he needs.
That is so good for him.
All right, so that brings him up.
And here comes Stoneforge Mystic trying to eat another Hawk. Just thinking about it. Do I want to do anything first? Just in case? Stoneforge Mystic? How does that sound?
Well, that's interesting because he's got nothing to go get. He's got the other sword in his hand.
He just wants a Squire in play in case AJ doesn't block.
Passes over.
Now with that Mortar Pod in play, David does have insurance against a surprise sort of Feast and Famine in the air.
Certainly. It's also another possibility that next turn he could throw the Germ at one of the Hawks, equip up one of the Stoneforge, throw it at a Hawk, and get in with the Stoneforge unless AJ can bring something else down here. Depends on how aggressive he wants to be. AJ hasn't put on a whole lot of pressure. And there's a Stoneforge from AJ, and that's going to change the game.
And there's a sword.
And Jace bounced up to 4. I didn't see the card that it gave David, but it gives him another shot at getting the land that he needs.
No land there. Looks
but
like
a preordain. Preordain ships one to the bottom, one to the top.
In comes a single Squadron Hawk. Just doing a little bit of nibbling.
Might as well get a little bit of damage in. And he passes back over. There's a Colonnade. That's not going to help him cast Gideon right now, but maybe a little bit down the road. Colonnade
There's
comes
Colonnade.
down.
Attack. It's going to maybe eat another Hawk.
Yep. Can't get hit with it. Although, interestingly, he didn't push at all, didn't do anything that would have made the untap.
Just that Colonnade.
Yep. Now, that would have been enough for him to try and bring Gideon down if he wanted to, but AJ has the Spell Pierce.
You know, that Jace has been doing so much work for AJ. And last game, it was the thing that I think pushed him over the top.
Yeah, certainly it pushed him ahead. David was in a pretty good board position, but AJ was able to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, holding on and then getting back in it and then ahead. Second Stoneforge Mystic from AJ finds Mortar Pod, and David's board is not as fragile as some often are, but it can certainly get in the way of one of the Mystics with a sword as Tectonic Edge drops and takes out the Colonnade. That both keeps David off of 5. AJ knows that he's been having some mana issues, but it also keeps him from being able to activate the Colonnade and do some do some damage. Second Sword of Feast and Famine from David, dropped down by the Stoneforge Mystic, as AJ says go.
One of the things to remember here is with AJ having access to Jace Beleren, the tectonic edges of AJ's are actually going to do a lot more work because he's more likely to be able to have the mana to keep fueling his side of the board.
Yeah. Tectonic Edge and Scalding Tarn both go back on top. Tectonic Edge comes down. And David's got to decide what to do with his 4 mana. Two of it.
Equip.
And he's got 2 guys that you don't want to mess with.
I bet you that he's going to eat at least one of these is going to chump block, most likely.
AJ is going to have to start doing something that's stop him from just throwing guys away. Caw-Blade doesn't have enough guys to just sit there and chump block all day.
He blocks one.
And he's deciding whether he's going to be blocking the next one. You got to expect that that sword's going to come down from an activation. Especially if he blocks both of them. Because if he's going to not let David untap, then he's not too scared of what David can do with that 2 mana. Spell Pierce, Gideon. He's going to take one of them. Discards a Stoneforge Mystic, which is an interesting choice.
David untaps. Says go. End of the turn, AJ puts a Sword of Feast and Famine into play.
Yep.
Untaps.
We've got Spell Pierce on both sides. David is holding a Mana Leaf. It's another Sea-Chrome Coast. A little better early game, but we'll give AJ some more flexibility.
Winds down the Jace.
AJ's digging to try and figure out exactly what he can do here. 2 swords on the other side is pretty tough to deal with.
Is that a
Mortar Pod?
Mortar Pod?
At this point, if he equips up his Stoneforge Mystic, he's able to throw the Mortar Pod to take out the one he blocks. You'd have 2, 3, 4s fighting, and that Mortar Pod can throw that germ for the last damage.
Equips the Stoneforge Mystic.
Trying to decide what to lay down here. Puts down the Sea-Chrome Coast. And decides to attack.
End of the turn. Divine Offering. Spell Pierce. Pays the 2. Second Spell Pierce
again.
Response with Spell Pierce.
And that's really bad for AJ.
Totally tapped out. Only 1 blocker left. Mortar Pod
jumps in front of the Stoneforge, throws himself at the Squadron Hawk.
Gideon comes into play.
David wastes no time at all.
With a hit there, untaps.
And you've got to think that's just it. AJ's probably going to untap, see whether he can get something else from Jace. He's got Gideon in hand, which all that's going to do is take out the other Gideon.
Which I think that his Jace killed Jace there from David.
Yep.
It's pretty solid.
So AJ's not even going to get the dig here. And let's see. Is that a Sun Titan? Picks up his graveyard to look through it, so you've got to think that's what it is.
Oh, it's because it was past the first
Remember, David's still holding the Mana Leak, and I think that probably will elicit the concession. Untapping with Sword is just such a major advantage in this matchup. When AJ went hard to try and protect his sword, and David was able to just push through, it was pretty much game over at that point, I think. The Germ and Stoneforge Mystic go in after Gideon. He plays the Mana Leak.
AJ packs
and
it up.
AJ packs it up. Yep, nothing to do at that point. And so David's still piloting with great efficiency.
I believe that this is going to put him as a draw into the top 8.
And that